All right, I guess I'll get started at 6 o'clock. If more people come on and join, great. So, want to say thanks for your interest in learning more about natural pain relief techniques. For those of you who don't know us, we're Valley Chiropractic Clinic. We're located in Juneau, Alaska. I am your host tonight. I'm Dr. Jason Nardi. A little bit about myself. I'm a certified by the American Board of Chiropractic Internists, as well as the American Clinical Board of Nutrition. And while I hold a fellow in medical acupuncture, that's not what we're talking about tonight, though. What we're talking about is akin to acupuncture. What we're talking about tonight is something called dry needling. It's kind of acupuncture's Western cousin. So we have a little bit of information to get through and good amount of time. So I'll get started and we'll have some questions at the end if you guys have anything that you want to learn more about. So dry needling is also known as intramuscular manual therapy. Big word, right? This is a soft tissue technique where it's mostly applied for myofascial pain. It's great for muscle and joint dysfunction as well. It uses thin stainless steel needles, acupuncture needles, that are inserted directly into the muscle. The needle structure itself is what we're using to get a therapeutic effect, right? This effect is going to help calm some inflamed nerves. It helps eliminate trigger points, and it essentially alleviates pain. So the goal of dry needling is threefold. First, we want to alleviate pain, right, first and foremost. We want to restore proper motion and function. And third, we want to induce a healing response in the tissue, speeding up recovery time. This is something I refer to a lot as remodeling, and I'll explain why in a little bit. So, and who doesn't love remodeling, right? So there's a lot to love about dry needling. So dry needling works in a lot of different ways. First and foremost, it has a whole body effect on the nervous system. Once your practitioner discovers what nerve center is really at play here, needles are inserted around the nerve emergence points, and that helps bring some blood flow to the area and new proteins and starts that remodeling process. Next, dry needling addresses some specific muscle dysfunctions by inserting the needle directly into muscle nodules, adhesions, scar tissue. This all initiates a vascular response, right? We want to bring blood to the area. In effect, a small hole is left by the needle cylinder, and this is then replaced by healthy tissue over the next 24 to 72 hours. So this is the remodeling. We have a bunch of proteins that come in and help break down some of that old tissue, whether it's acutely damaged within the last couple of days or 10 years ago from an old sporting or motor vehicle accident. And then the body will start to heal that area and bring and grow new tissue in here. So that's where the remodeling comes from. If you think dry needling sounds a lot like acupuncture, you're kind of correct. Both techniques use the same needles. There's some similarities. Acupuncture is based on traditional Chinese medicine and the idea that there's these different meridians or energy channels that run through the body, and they carry this energy called qi or life energy. Blockages in these meridians or diminished or excess amounts of these energies in the meridians are what causes ill health in Chinese medicine. Needles are used to open up or dam, so to speak, the flow of this energy. Usually, once the needles are inserted into very specific points called meridian points, patients are left to rest for about a good 20 to 30 minutes. Points are usually needled on the front and back of the patient, and they're usually based on symptoms as well as something called pulse diagnosis. Dry needling, on the other hand, is based on anatomy and physiology. We're using anatomy to get a physiological response. Mostly what we're trying to do is get blood to rush to the area. We're looking for a vascular response, and we want a neurogenic or neurological response too, to help desensitize some of that inflamed tissue and help regenerate tissue that's underneath. When dry needling is performed, the needle is seated. We will tap the needle into usually fascia or muscle tissue itself. The needle is usually manipulated. It's sometimes twisted to ravel up some of the protein fibers in the fascia. Sometimes we'll do some thrusting where we'll actually create a bunch of small lesions. Sometimes the needle is just seated and tapped. The insertion of the needles with dry needling can remain for a while, usually several minutes, long enough time to make that muscle tissue relax. The placement of the needles is at the end determined by specific trigger points associated with pain. It's associated too with where nerves come out inside of the body, where we can get kind of close to actually cause a little bit of a different sensation and cause some pain blockage in the central nervous system, not just in the localized area. So techniques in dry needling can be used to increase range of motion. This is usually due to a limited muscle ability, right? Usually tightness or buildup of scar tissue. But dry needling helps with a lot of different things like joint problems, disc problems, tendinitis. Use it a lot for migraine and tension headaches, general headaches, TMJ disorder, whiplash, repetitive stress disorders like carpal tunnel, spinal problems, pelvic problems, night cramps, phantom limb pain, post-herpetic neuralgia, which is the pain you get after you have shingles. It's really helpful for that. Shoulder pain, knee pain, Achilles tendinitis, sciatica, plantar fasciitis, hip and gluteal pain. Those are kind of the big things that we've been seeing in our office. And dry needling tends to help those out quite a bit. This is an interesting picture. If you see here, this is actually a medical acupuncture procedure for a trigger point. One hand's holding an instrument that's used to seat the needle, and the other one's holding an ultrasound head. You can kind of see some ultrasound gel underneath the fingers of the other hand on the technician. This is a pretty complex ultrasound guided technique. We don't do that in our office. We are using palpation and anatomy to alleviate trigger points. This is something that was originally done with injectables, where dry needling is just that. It's a dry needle. There's nothing to inject. So one of the big techniques that we like to use is pistoning. These techniques are they're in and out insertions of the needle. The needle is sent into a trigger point and then removed about halfway and then reinserted. We do this about 4 to 6 times, and this makes tiny little lesions in the tissue to get a really large healing effect. Again, that remodeling. Pecking is something that we use for things like osteoarthritis or degenerative bone problems. The needle is placed around the pathological joint, and then it's just slightly tapped once it's in there. So there's no thrusting. It's just seated all the way, and we just tap it about 3 times. What this does is it increases fluid inside the joint capsule. So let's say you have an arthritic knee, you can go in there, insert 2 needles in the upper portion of the joint capsule, tap it about 3 times. You leave it in there for about 3 to 5 minutes, pull it out. The body then sees that as an injury and starts to build up more synovial fluid in the joint to help protect it. Of course, anytime you go in for this type of procedure, make sure your practitioner spends some time with you, and that way we can determine what technique's right for you, right? So not everybody needs pecking, not everybody needs pistoning. Everything is really based on the individual and their condition. Non-trigger point techniques are applied when there's a broader neurological problem. Instead of inserting needles only in the area of pain, the practitioner instead is going to insert needles around the area of pain and not just the area directly associated with it. This technique relies on the idea that the pain's a result of greater neurological input. It's not just simply a muscle issue or a pain issue. So we're not just focusing on the trigger point, we're really relying on getting pain to be blocked more at a neurological level elsewhere in the body, usually in the spinal cord. This is really great when people have pain but no injury. And probably the most classic form of that is fibromyalgia, or when people have residual pain from old accidents, especially motor vehicle accidents. Whiplash is a great way to have pain later on, even though there's really no injury left in the tissue. That tissue remodeled the wrong way. So we need to go back in there and make the body remodel it to be a little bit more correct. Intramuscular stimulation. This is, I don't use this one that much, but this is when we use the needle directly at a trigger point. The trigger point gets a local twitch response. We'll actually see tissue jumping a little bit. The sensation is perceived mostly by patients as a release or kind of a warm rush, that's a good sign that the right trigger point's been needled. Other times, this is used in smaller muscles or around a joint to help get them to relax. This is really great in hip and shoulder pain problems, where we can get into rotator cuff and hip rotator muscles and just get very small muscles to relax a great deal. You can get a lot of range of motion back in the joint as well as decrease pain too. Superficial dry needling is very close to the type of dry needling that's done in acupuncture. I should say for pain in acupuncture, they call these AC points. This technique, the needle is inserted just a few millimeters above a trigger point or a painful area. The idea here is that we can create a pain that's not localized in the actual area that's causing pain. The body tends to forget it. This triggers a couple of reflexes of analgesic mechanisms via the spinal cord and in the brain itself. This is one I use a lot, intramuscular electrostimulation. This utilizes at least 2 needles. They're stimulated using a light TENS current or transcutaneous electronerve stimulation. So what we're doing here is we're using a TENS device to cause intramuscular stimulation. So we're actually letting the needles themselves be the conductor instead of a conductive pad. Not only can we get excellent pain reduction doing this, but we also see changes in muscle tone. We can make muscles that are ultra hypertonic or tight relax, and muscles that aren't engaging actually tighten up and work a little bit better. The effect of this technique lasts a really long time too. We see when we do this for things like knee arthritis, we see pain relief that can last up to 2 weeks just by simply adding a little bit of current to that. All right, so talked about trigger points a lot. So what are they? Right? Let's talk about that for a few minutes. Knots, knots can be felt in sore muscles, and that's what we refer to as trigger points. They're sensitive spots in soft tissue, and these so-called knots are just merely inflamed tissue. Some of the researchers are really showing that this is tissue that has become more densified tissue and dry. It's becoming thickened and forcing water out of it and making it therefore become even thicker. Trigger point therapy mostly consists of things like rubbing and pressing on trigger points, which can feel like a lot of amazing relief, especially if you're a person who has a lot of pain. The technique of dry needling goes one step further by inserting the needle into the troublesome trigger points and getting a more physiological reaction. So where do they occur? They can happen anywhere you have muscles, really, right? Most are found in the neck, back, and shoulders, arms and legs, basically everywhere. We find passive trigger points like this one here in the hand. There's another one actually on the other side by the pinky and ring finger. People don't really know they have them there until you press on them. And that's what I mean by passive. They're not a problem until you go, ooh, that hurts. And needling those even far away for, like, say, a shoulder or a hip problem, you might find a passive trigger point in a foot or a hand and put a needle in that just to help get more of a response to the brain and central nervous system to help reduce that pain. So we keep talking about fascia, and what fascia is a sheet of connective tissue primarily made of collagen type 1 and type 3 actually. It sits beneath the skin. It attaches, stabilizes, encloses, and separates things, right? Like muscle, internal organs, even some of your blood vessels. Fascia, when it comes to pain in our office, why fascia is important is fascia sits and holds your skin to your muscles. And that area is where a lot of the nerves that we get sensation from on top of our skin, that's where it lives. So when that tissue becomes thick, it actually presses on those nerves. That's why these points are tender. We are compressing nerves that bring sensation up to our brain. So we conceive that as pain. And when that tissue sticks, we also lose something called mechanoreception, or the sense of movement. So as that tissue adheses and doesn't move the right way, we lose mechanoreception, and that increases pain reception or nociception as well. So fascia and muscle together make up something called the myofascial system. There's a bunch of different ways you can release tight fascia. We can do things like deep tissue massage, foam rolling, like the lady in this picture, Rolfing, trigger point therapy. We use things like the Groston technique, where we take a metal instrument and scrape them in the direction the fascia is supposed to move in, and of course, dry needling. Probably the biggest benefit of dry needling is its natural pain relief. It's a non-pharmacological, non-addicting form of getting rid of pain. People are really looking for drug-free alternatives to alleviate chronic pain. They frequently turn to things like dry needling, massage, myofascial release. When you combine that with stuff like chiropractic adjustments, therapeutic exercises, and physiotherapies, we tend to get really great results in pain reduction. It becomes a very powerful combination of tools. Another benefit of dry needling offers is an increased range of motion, right? So whether you're an athlete or an older patient trying to maintain health, having good range of motion becomes really essential. Dry needling also helps aid and speed recovery time after injuries. Neat thing that we'll do if we see a patient who's been recently injured and they have some bruising, stick 1 or 2 small needles inside the bruise. By the time we're done doing the rest of the dry needling session, those bruises are already changing color around the needle. You can see the change of the skin getting lighter. So it really makes a big difference in pretty much any type of injury that we've had walk in our door so far. So probably the biggest problem with dry needling is people don't like needles. They really don't. These aren't the same needles that you use when you're getting a shot or giving blood. They're not hollow, for one thing. They're extremely thin. The needles we're using are sterile, disposable, one-time use needles. They're usually about anywhere from 0.16 millimeters to 0.3 millimeters in thickness. That's we're talking about the width of a human hair on the smaller side of the scale. We use needles that range from 1/2 inch all the way up to 5 inches. And while that sounds kind of scary, the choice of needle is really based on anatomy. If I need to get to the piriformis muscle, which tends to cause a lot of low back pain in patients, it's pretty deep. It's underneath all your gluteal muscles. It's underneath a lot of tissue. We need a 5-inch needle to get there. It's a needle, again, that's about the size of 2 human hairs, though. So most people don't even feel it go in. The choice of needle is always going to be dependent on the patient and their size. Bodybuilder is going to need a longer needle than my 93-year-old grandmother, right? Most people, they'll feel some discomfort. Usually it's they'll feel some burning or some heat while the needle's in there for the first minute or two. But pain's not really associated with dry needling. Probably the most painful part for most people is the initial prick of the skin when the needle's set in. It does cause some people a little bit of a jump. Some people don't feel it at all. Some people are shocked when I tell them, "Hey, there's 3 needles in you already," and they don't believe me, but they're very tiny. So dry needling too, it's part of a multidisciplinary approach. We're gonna look at things like movement analysis or range of motion in a joint. We're gonna look at using some things like targeted exercises to help kind of increase range of motion. We'll add in chiropractic adjustments, of course. Sometimes nutrition is really appropriate, and some other interventions. We really like to see things in combination. A great example, an adjustment in dry needling, they work simultaneously. They improve musculoskeletal pain together, right? So having an adjustment prior to dry needling can really be beneficial to reduce hyperactivity or irritation in the muscle. And the other cool thing is a lot of the research on dry needling is showing that having soft tissue work like massage, neuromuscular re-education, or therapeutic exercise after being dry needled increases the benefit of the dry needling therapy for more days, right? We usually see about a 72-hour crescent in the ability of this to reduce pain. So first day, it's like, I feel better. Second day, I feel a lot better. Third day, wow, I feel great. And then it starts to kind of taper off again over the next 2 days. When we combine this with other techniques, we see that plateau lasts a little bit longer, sometimes even weeks. So prior to a dry needling session, patients undergo a consultation and an exam, just like any other type of medical procedure. Patients are going to report a lot about their pain, provide a little bit of history about the problem. During the examination, the musculoskeletal system is mostly what's going to be evaluated, especially the muscles typically involved in the pain that the patient's experiencing, according to something called a myofascial map. So we can actually map out where all these different trigger points normally are. I like to use a lot of, again, anatomy, insertions of muscles and origins of muscles, as well as where nerves are closest to the surface of the skin. Dry needling begins with a thorough assessment, right? We're going to look at the issue that the patient's pretty much complaining about, their pain mostly. The muscles are evaluated for active trigger points. We use this by applying pressure with a rolling finger. This is simply palpation. The points could be pretty tender on a lot of people. Session length and method really vary. It depends on the individual case and the patient's needs. Needles are sometimes manipulated once they're put in place. Sometimes they're removed pretty quickly. And a lot of times we're going to use muscle stim. We're going to use intramuscular stimulation on those two to help get a better, greater lasting result. So probably the things that we hear the most about side effects, right? Because everything has a side effect. Some patients experience some soreness following a session, either immediately or a couple hours after, very similar to being adjusted. Feeling tired, nauseous, or emotional, that's not uncommon. We haven't had anybody be nauseous. The literature does state that there's a possibility of it. We have had 2 people laugh. They've had some emotional outbursts. It's always been laughter. We haven't had anybody cry yet. This usually lasts for a short period. Some people feel a little fatigued, especially if we're using muscle stim. We're trying to get muscles to relax, and sometimes we get them pretty relaxed, especially larger muscles like the low back and the hip. That can make you feel a little tired afterwards. Increased water intake is always recommended after a session like this. Again, if we're trying to bring this giant amount of blood to the area, and that takes more fluid dynamics, so water really helps with that. Things like soaking in a hot bath are really helpful. Heating pads sometimes too can help that muscle relax afterwards and reduce any potential soreness. We haven't had too many people complain of soreness after a session though. So I am going to quickly pause this and see if anybody has any questions. Excellent. I am going to just give a few shout outs to a few people who helped with some of the information we used. I gathered some information from healthline.com, colleague at Lohr Chiropractic, that's LOEHR Chiro.com. Pain Science, we got some information on trigger points from them. Myofascial Release .com. Farrellwitted.com, that's a PT talking about some of the benefits of dry needling. HonorHealthSystems.com. Just want to give them a quick little shout out for letting us steal information from their website. Yep. So that kind of concludes our talk tonight. I really appreciate you all taking time out and coming here and learning about the technique of dry needling. If you think you have any questions, don't hesitate to give us a call. Reach out. We're always happy to talk to people and answer any questions they might have about treatment or what might be appropriate treatment for them. Our office number is 907-789-9549. And you can also check out our website. My website's nardichiropractic.com, or you can find us on Facebook, social media at Facebook.com/Valley Chiro Clinic. We'll also post the recording of the video minus the questions probably in the next day or two, and open it up for comments. So if you guys have any questions, you can also comment there. So thank you again. I appreciate you, and I'll look out for you on the next showing. Take care.